Hello everybody, welcome back. Today we are continuing our look at the third week of the Pokemon Players Cup video game regional qualifiers. And there's been some really awesome Pokemon that we've seen over the last few commentary videos. And I'm excited to keep going. Today we're heading over to the EU bracket with, I believe, let's check here, Guillermo, Castilla, and Antonio Sanchez, Cervan. So these are both players from the EU. We are still in the losers bracket. This is losers bracket round 11. So we still have a little bit of a ways to go, but not too much further before we get to look at the Players Cup finals, where we see the best of the best from around the world that have gone through this tournament and face off finally. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get right into it. Whoop. All right, so this is game one of the series. We'll see if we can get to a full best of three here. And we see Antonio leads with a Corviknight and an Arcanine, and Guillermo leads with Porygon 2 and Amoonguss. So we kind of have, just right off the bat, two very different speed tiers here. Arcanine is at least compared to Amoonguss and Porygon 2, a very fast Pokemon at that base, I believe 95 or 97 speed. And it also has access to moves like Extreme Speed. And it also has stuff like Snarl, Will-O-Wisp. I can have Flare Blitz, Flamethrower. So many moves, even stuff like Safeguard that can prevent Amoonguss from being able to spread a lot of sleep powders. And then we have Corviknight over here. Very bulky, can be very defensive with moves like Iron Defense, and then use Body Press as a strong attack. Also has access to like Tailwind to make Antonio's team even faster. And also has moves that can be used like Brave Bird for super effective damage on the Amoonguss. So at least in this front lead here, it feels like Antonio definitely has the advantage. Now we see Gastrodon coming out. That's a relatively safe switch. There's not a lot of moves that Guillermo wants to put into that Corviknight slot that Gastrodon isn't willing to take. However, it looks like Gastrodon just got burned here. Porygon 2 uses Trick Room. So I imagine that this Arcanine just used Will-O-Wisp on the Gastrodon. That seems to be the... honestly, I'm very... Well, actually, this is actually a pretty interesting play from Antonio, because now it means Gastrodon can't be put to sleep by Amoonguss. And if that's... And there's a good chance that Arcanine has something like Safety Goggles on, so right now Amoonguss just might not be able to do much, except maybe redirect the Gastrodon. And now that Gastrodon isn't asleep, the burn does do some damage over time, but it doesn't really affect Gastrodon's attack stat at all, because Gastrodon is a special attacker. This is actually a very interesting move here, and now we see the Primarina coming in. Amoonguss uses Spore, does hit it into the Arcanine. Arcanine, here we see no safety goggles there. Arcanine does go to sleep. Here we see, looks like an Earth Power coming out of the Gastrodon here. Does a good chunk to the Amoonguss, and now we have a Primarina out. And the other thing that Gastrodon does have is that ability Storm Drain. So right now, Primarina's Water-type moves aren't going to be doing anything into the Gastrodon. Now Amoonguss is kind of stuck using its attacking moves. Gastrodon already willing to attack into the Amoonguss, and Guillermo is just perfectly content with chipping away at the health here. It looks like probably, yeah, going into the Arcanine seems like the smart play here. Take it down while you can. Primarina, while it does have something like a, Hydro Cannon, it very likely can just Dynamax and go for a Max Fairy, or sometimes it even has something like an Energy Ball, which is something Gastrodon does not want to face down. Here we see the Dynamax factor being used, looks like by Antonio here. We have a gigantic Gastrodon now ready to send out some very strong, well, not very, but relatively strong attacks. Gastrodon is not a Pokemon that we normally see Dynamaxing. Normally it would be something along the lines of maybe Corviknight, maybe even Arcanine, but traditionally Gastrodon normally tries to use moves like Recover to bring itself back up. It utilizes the burn from Scald pretty well if it can, if that can trigger. But here we see Primarina Dynamaxes after Gastrodon, so Guillermo's Trick Room kind of actually playing in Antonio's favor a little bit. See the Sludge Bomb coming out of Amoonguss into the Arcanine for a decent chunk of damage. And now a Max Quake out of Gastrodon into the Amoonguss slot. Doesn't quite take it out, but it will raise the special defense of both of Antonio's Pokemon, which is going to be important against this Primarina. Now, if the Supreme Arena is Life Orb, both of Antonio's Pokemon are certainly in range of getting KO'd. Max Fairy comes out here onto the Gastrodon, but does resist it. So no Max Grass out of the Primarina. That's definitely something to keep in mind. What is this? Misty Terrain. Oh my god, I completely forgot the name of the terrain for a minute. I was going to call it Fairy Terrain, but that's incorrect. Misty Terrain is now up and active. So Amoonguss actually isn't going to be able to spore anybody else on Antonio's team right now until this Misty Terrain gets off the battlefield. So there's a couple big options here. This Amoonguss is very close to being KO'd. Misty Terrain makes it so that no sleeps are going to be able to come out. It does a decent chunk to Arcanine, but I think this is a smart switch from Guillermo, as Amoonguss can be saved for a later time when it will be far more useful. And as we can see here, Gastrodon coming out hits into the Primarina, does a little bit of damage. This Porygon 2 remaining untouched so far. Primarina looks like it's going to be moving next here, but these special defense boosts are going to be big out of both of Antonio's Pokemon. Max Fairy doing considerably less damage to this Gastrodon, and we see that berry getting triggered. Now, this burn is doing work from Guillermo's side. Of course, Gastrodon not being asleep is pretty big, but that damage over time is definitely going to be something Antonio has to consider. Because right now neither player has taken a knockout, but both players definitely have Pokemon that are getting very, very weak. Porygon 2 here has stuff like Ice Beam, can have Thunderbolt, but that's not going to do anything to Gastrodon. Tri-Attack, honestly probably the best move here, because Primarina just simply cannot use a water type attack into this Gastrodon. Rillaboom comes out now. Traditionally, Rillaboom has something like an Assault Vest here. I wouldn't be surprised to see it right now, but the Grassy Terrain comes out, giving Rillaboom the ability to use that Grassy Glide. Porygon 2, once again, unless it's an Ice Beam, it's not really going to have anything that's super effective against this Rillaboom either. Then we see Max Ground again, going into that Primarina, doing just about 1/3 of damage every time, maybe a little bit less than that special defense boost, is going to be important. And now this Primarina is pressured by this Rillaboom pretty darn hard. Tri-Attack comes out here, does a little bit to the Gastrodon, just manages to tickle it. Max Fairy comes out into the Gastrodon again. These special defense boosts are so important, but now Gastrodon is so weak, and now Misty Terrain is up. And Rillaboom no longer has option to a Grassy Terrain boosted Grassy Glide, and no longer gets the priority from that. Even something like the Wood Hammer is going to be considerably weakened here. And in Trick Room, that +1 priority from Grassy Glide would have been huge. Both Pokemon going back down to their baby forms. Gastrodon, like I said, very, very weak. It will be moving faster than the Primarina, but maybe not this. But we know it's not moving faster than this Porygon 2, unless they are somehow speed tied, which doesn't seem like that is the case. Guillermo here, the Primarina isn't really in that much danger, at least from a priority grass move, but Rillaboom still puts a lot of pressure on it. If it does have something like a Wood Hammer, even a knockoff here, wouldn't be the best thing in the world for Primarina, even if it does resist. So there's a very good chance we could see a swap here, unless Primarina does have an ice move like Blizzard, or like Blizzard, which it does sometimes carry. In which case, Rillaboom is not in a great spot, but the Wood Hammer does come out and Primarina goes down. And it looks like Trick Room has actually faded. Gastrodon now using that Recover, so it is a Recover set on the Gastrodon. Very interesting choice for Antonio there to use the Dynamax, playing super, super hard around this Gastrodon. And there we see Porygon 2 setting the Trick Room back up. So this Gastrodon is surviving for a very long time, can't be put to sleep. This is definitely a very strong counterplay into the Amoonguss from Antonio, as well as even into the Trick Room. Gastrodon, a fairly slow Pokemon, and as we saw, so one interesting thing about this, an important thing about this, is that these players know each other's teams and their moves, most importantly. So Antonio knew going into this that Amoonguss didn't have a grass move for this Gastrodon, which meant Gastrodon was kind of just this really big wall to Amoonguss. We saw Amoonguss came back in the Regenerator ability, regaining some of its health. Porygon 2 using a Thunderbolt here, hardly doing anything to that Rillaboom. And now we see the knockoff coming out into the Porygon 2, getting rid of that Eviolite, greatly weakening Porygon 2's defenses. And now this Gastrodon kind of has free reign here. We see the two kind of attacking moves on Porygon 2, Thunderbolt and Tri-Attack. It didn't really do much to Gastrodon. This Gastrodon now has 3 special defense boosts. Unless there is a strong physical attacking grass type, this Gastrodon is going to be very, very healthy for a very long time with moves like Recover. And since it can't be put to sleep because of the very, very heads up play by Antonio to Will-O-Wisp his own Pokemon, it's going to be a little bit difficult to get rid of this Gastrodon. Porygon 2 switching out here into the Arcanine. That will be good. Gets an Intimidate off onto the Rillaboom, and that's going to greatly impact moves like Wood Hammer in the future. But I wouldn't be surprised. Antonio with this Gastrodon is in a very good spot. Rillaboom definitely not the biggest fan of taking Sludge Bombs from Amoonguss. Gastrodon, Earth Power goes into the Amoonguss, doesn't really do anything. Knockoff coming out of Rillaboom into the Amoonguss here, maybe kind of showing us that it has something like a Choice Band. Guillermo, like we said though, does know what item that Rillaboom has. Arcanine here though definitely puts a lot of pressure on Rillaboom, but doesn't really put too much on the Gastrodon. But now we know all 4 Pokemon that each player brought. Antonio still has a full health Corviknight in the back, as well as the Arcanine that is asleep and does have some damage on it. But and we know Corviknight doesn't really want to come into this Arcanine right now, but Rillaboom also doesn't want to stay in. I wouldn't be surprised if Antonio brings in their own Arcanine here, gets an Intimidate off in case Guillermo's Arcanine wants to use something like a Flare Blitz or even an Extreme Speed if it has it. And that Sleepy Intimidate definitely pretty big here. Guillermo's Arcanine just goes for a Protect, not wanting to take a potential Scald or Earth Power from Gastrodon, but Gastrodon just goes for the Recover. And now this Porygon 2 is in. We see pretty much some switches and some healing from Antonio's Gastrodon. I feel like this definitely puts Antonio in a pretty good position here, because now there's no Dynamax for Guillermo to reset the terrain. Once that Rillaboom comes back in, it can just start Grassy Gliding left and right. And now Guillermo's Arcanine has used its Protect, and we see the Earth Power coming out now. This is going to be super effective damage. It's going to do quite a bit. Almost takes down the Arcanine, not quite all the way, but it is a crit. That definitely might be important here. The berry, it triggers Guillermo's berry, but that is a huge amount of damage, and it's absolutely going to go down to another Earth Power. Tri-Attack comes out now into Antonio's Arcanine, does a decent chunk of damage, but again, I think the important thing here, Snarl comes out. That is going to weaken the Gastrodon. I think that's going to be the #1 thing that Guillermo has to do here, just try to get as many Snarls off as possible. But Antonio's Arcanine wakes up. Looks like a Heat Wave comes out, does a little bit of chip damage to both Pokemon. Doesn't do nearly enough to take down either one though. So now we kind of see that Guillermo's answer to this Gastrodon is going to be really this Arcanine trying to get off as many Snarls as possible. Antonio is probably a little bit wary about switching out Gastrodon right now, as it does have those 3 special defense boosts. But Guillermo's Primarina is already out of the picture, so Gastrodon has done most of its job, and it is still burned, which means Amoonguss is never going to be able to put it to sleep this whole game. Snarl from Antonio's Gastrodon comes out now, weakens the Porygon 2 a little bit, weakens the Amoonguss a little bit, but no super effective damage from a potential Heat Wave here. We see Earth Power coming out again. This Amoonguss Regenerator ability is eating up so much of the damage from the Gastrodon here. So now Antonio is in Guillermo and Antonio are both in interesting positions here. If Guillermo does try to go for another Spore on the Arcanine, there's a good chance Antonio just switches the Rillaboom in, gets the terrain set up, and starts going for Grassy Glides. Antonio knows that this Porygon 2 doesn't have an Ice Beam, it just has Tri-Attack and Thunderbolt, both of which Rillaboom is really kind of just fine with taking. And once Grassy Glides start coming out, it's going to be pretty scary. However, Guillermo does still have his own Arcanine in the back, which means that Arcanine can come in, put an Intimidate on the Rillaboom, and things are getting a little bit dicey. Now Guillermo uses the Protect here smartly. Tri-Attack comes out and absolutely nothing happens here, except both players do use their Protect, and Gastrodon takes a little bit more chip damage from the burn. I probably don't have to keep saying that. That's pretty much a given. For the rest of this game here, this Gastrodon has not moved. Antonio is pivoting in only that one slot, the current Arcanine slot, leaving Gastrodon kind of out here to put on a little bit of pressure. But the problem is, now that that Snarl is out, it's not putting on enough pressure. Guillermo here uses the Spore again. Antonio does not swap to the Rillaboom, and Arcanine is once again asleep. Earth Power coming out of the Gastrodon again, trying its hardest to take down this Amoonguss. Tri-Attack comes out into the Arcanine now. And Arcanine does manage to survive just barely, and that berry finally gets triggered on Antonio's side, bringing Arcanine up to a considerable amount of health. Arcanine stays asleep as to be expected. So now Guillermo and Antonio have a couple things to consider here. The Arcanine is still asleep, maybe swapping it out, but this Amoonguss does use Protect. There is a chance that Guillermo switches out the Amoonguss to start getting that Regenerator ability up at some point. Once again, this Amoonguss is just so hard for Gastrodon to take down after a Snarl, and now that Arcanine is a little bit lower, Porygon 2 is definitely still a threat to it, especially since it's asleep and we are currently in Trick Room. Amoonguss is certainly in an Earth Power range, but the Protect is up and switching is a possibility. Guillermo switches out the Porygon 2 to bring in his own Arcanine. A relatively safe switch, as Antonio has not been targeting that slot at all. There's a chance though Antonio reads the Protect out of the Amoonguss, as it's kind of been every other turn Amoonguss has used the Protect, and maybe goes into the Porygon 2 slot, but nope, just goes into the Amoonguss slot, and we have a very slow passive game. And now this Arcanine, the Protect from the Amoonguss here, but Overheat comes out, a little more chip damage on Guillermo's Arcanine. This is going to be important for later in the game, as I think both of these Pokemon are now certainly close to, if not within, Grassy Glide range, as we are. And it looks like Grassy Terrain, yeah, there's still no terrain up, as Rillaboom has not come in after the Misty Terrain went down. And Guillermo is just sitting here switching these slots around, trying to cover for that Rillaboom switch in as much as possible. Now Antonio's Arcanine is awake though. This Amoonguss goes ahead, uses the Spore. Trick Room is huge here. At any point, if Antonio can get that Rillaboom switched in, timing it right with Amoonguss's Spores, or this Amoonguss might just go down here. Amoonguss does go down, so now there's no more Spores coming from Guillermo's side, and there's not going to be any more Intimidates after this turn, which means Rillaboom can kind of come in safely, save for a potential Flare Blitz. So Gastrodon now has a single job, and that is to take down Guillermo's Arcanine. Antonio though still has that Corviknight in the back. Corviknight can potentially use something like Tailwind once they get out of Trick Room, but it's going to be going down pretty quickly. So we're going to have to see what Antonio does here. 2 Fire Weak Pokemon in the back against an Arcanine. The Arcanine is relatively weak though, as we said. Looks like a Will-O-Wisp potentially coming out of Guillermo's Arcanine. I'm not entirely sure here. Maybe it is just an Overheat or a Heat Wave, something along those lines. Antonio's Arcanine stays asleep though. Looks like it maybe tried to use something like Protect, and Guillermo was kind of calling the Rillaboom switch in there. Tri-Attack comes out into Antonio's Arcanine. Antonio's Arcanine goes down, meaning this Rillaboom gets to come in perfectly safe. Antonio now uses the Scald from Gastrodon and brings in Rillaboom. So one thing that a lot of people have thought about Gastrodon, at least recently, is that it kind of has a problem where if you just take out all of its teammates, the Gastrodon can't really do much about it. But right now, Gastrodon kind of really has proven itself as too much of a threat for Guillermo to ignore, and because Guillermo did just ignore it the whole time, and still has 2 Pokemon in the back. I think that can kind of tell us a couple things about Antonio's team. Antonio's Arcanine was relatively bulky, but it also tells us a little bit about Guillermo's team. Guillermo's team was not well equipped to handle a bulky fire type like Arcanine when paired with a Gastrodon, as the only Pokemon that really likes to face down the Arcanine on Guillermo's team is Primarina, and with that Gastrodon right next to it, none of that really happened, and none of it super helped Guillermo in this battle. So right now, it's a Porygon 2 versus the world. It's going to be very hard for it to come out on top, though it certainly can with moves like Recover if it gets a potential Freeze or a Paralyze off a Thunderbolt or Tri-Attack. Gastrodon using Recover, this is going to be a little bit of a long, slow grind here if Guillermo really does want to keep playing this out. We saw that Rillaboom did use Fake Out, so it is not Choice Banded or Choice Scarfed or anything along those lines. I wouldn't be surprised to start seeing some Grassy Glides here soon. The recovery is going to be big for both of these Pokemon. But Porygon 2 is certainly a mon that can handle a 3v1. I know that's kind of surprising. Normally you would see something and think maybe a Rillaboom could do it. Heck, maybe even a Gastrodon could do it if it's immune to one of the water type Pokemon and resists like something. You know, if it was an Arcanine, if it was 3v1 the other way, I wouldn't be surprised to say like Gastrodon could probably take down a Porygon 2, a Primarina, and an Arcanine. But a Porygon 2 versus a Corviknight, Gastrodon, and a Rillaboom, keep in mind, this Porygon 2 has already lost its Eviolite, so it is pretty weak. So Guillermo here looks like just kind of hunting for more information. We know Earth Power, Recover, and Scald on the Gastrodon. We know Rillaboom now has Fake Out. Corviknight coming out here. And we're going down to the timer on this game. Kind of just shows how long this game 1 was. Tri-Attack going into the Corviknight, not doing a ton of damage here, but there is a Paralysis. That's at least something here, but a Berry comes out now. Potentially a Lum Berry cures the Paralysis. And Scald coming out of the Gastrodon now. Porygon 2, like I said, even without the Eviolite, is still bulky, and the grassy terrain recovery is going to be pretty big here. Guillermo, though, standing his ground, not letting Antonio get out of this first game without a fight. Thunderbolt coming out into the Corviknight, and that's the one thing, though. Guillermo doesn't have any idea, hold on. I'm not sure. So Guillermo actually knows all the information from Antonio's team. It's definitely an interesting choice. The timer is going to run down, though, since Antonio has 3 Pokemon to Guillermo's 1. That is going to be the first game in Antonio's favor, I believe. So that was game 1. Definitely, we kind of had a slow, long grind there, and certainly an interesting game. We really saw that was like I said, very heads-up play from Antonio there, using Arcanine's Will-O-Wisp onto the Gastrodon to make sure that it wasn't going to sleep from Amoonguss. Definitely pretty big. And then that Gastrodon getting the special defense boost and was really this big wall to the Primarina that made it so it couldn't take down Arcanine. Arcanine resisted both of its other moves, both in the Fairy type stab. We didn't see exactly what it was. Might have been Moon Blast or Dazzling Gleam, but the Max Fairy that we did see, and it looked like a Blizzard from the Primarina on the other move. So definitely kind of scary for Guillermo to have to deal with. Gonna have to bring something else to deal with that Gastrodon. Amoonguss can't do it. It only has Sludge Bomb. And if Antonio kind of does that same thing in the beginning, let me fix this camera here real quick. Yeah, and if Antonio does the same kind of thing in the beginning, Will-O-Wisping his own Pokemon, especially something like Gastrodon, Guillermo's going to be in a little bit of trouble. Now, we did see Guillermo is definitely a fighter, wants to really work through that game, but Trick Room there didn't seem like it helped Guillermo really as much as it helped Antonio, because it let that Gastrodon kind of move ahead of some of Antonio's more key pieces, like Antonio's Arcanine and Primarina. So we'll see if Guillermo kind of goes with that same mode, the same Trick Room mode with Amoonguss, or maybe tries to bring a slower threat that can really try to deal with Gastrodon here, because that's definitely something that's going to be important. Otherwise, Guillermo is going to have to figure out a way to take out all the Pokemon next to Gastrodon just as quickly as possible, and put Gastrodon into a situation where it isn't a 3v1 or a 4v1, and it's potentially not burned so that Amoonguss can put it to sleep or something. So let's go ahead, let's get into this next game here, and let's see what happens. Antonio leads with the same 2 Pokemon. I think this is a very strong lead. Arcanine getting Intimidate off is pretty big, and Corviknight can use stuff like Tailwind. Here we see Arcanine's Intimidate will actually, if Corviknight, has that Mirror Armor ability, and the Intimidate gets bounced back onto Arcanine there, might be important, but we did see that Antonio's Arcanine is a little more specially invested with moves like Overheat and Snarl. Definitely something to keep in mind. We do see, though, Guillermo bringing a Corviknight of his own, has options like Tailwind. We kind of talked about this last game with Antonio's Corviknight. Has moves like Broad, likely has moves like Body Press, even like Iron Head / Steel Wing. Probably want to go for Iron Head though, and then something like Brave Bird, Tailwind, Protect, something along those lines. But since Guillermo does have that Porygon 2, this Corviknight might actually be a little bit slower than your normal Corviknight, and just to kind of be able to be utilized in Trick Room against other Corviknights, as we see here with Antonio. So here we see Porygon 2 just actually coming right on in. Overheat coming out now. It's going to do a good chunk to Amoonguss, but the expected damage onto Corviknight doesn't come through with the switch into Porygon 2. So looks like, was that a bulk up? Looks like that was actually a bulk up from Antonio's Corviknight. So the defense raises, but so does the attack. Corviknight is getting set. Corviknight is starting to set up here. Guillermo sends the sleep into the Arcanine again. This Arcanine just really likes taking naps this match. With this Corviknight setting up though, there are a few things that Guillermo has to watch out for. Body Press is going to be super effective into the Porygon 2. Might not take it out all the way, but it's going to do a good chunk of damage. Brave Bird into the Amoonguss might take it out from the range that it's at now. And even Guillermo's Corviknight on a switch in does not want to be taking something like a Body Press. It might be alright taking a Brave Bird, but it's still going to be damage that it would rather not have on it when it's facing down a Corviknight of its own. Antonio, though, after taking a turn to set up, just goes ahead and swaps out into Rillaboom. Might be reading that Guillermo tries to Spore into that slot and just puts Rillaboom out. Can't be Spored, can't be Rage Powdered. And Arcanine remaining asleep. So Rillaboom coming in, Arcanine still asleep. No damage coming out of Antonio's side this time. Amoonguss. We'll see what happens here. Porygon 2 does use Trick Room though. And Amoonguss looks like it did in fact go for the Spore onto the Rillaboom, and it didn't have any effect. Powder Move's no longer working on Grass-type Pokemon. So we'll see what happens here. Rillaboom now does have access. That Grassy Glide is unlocked. And we might even see a Dynamax out of it. Dynamax or Gigantamax Rillaboom is certainly a threat. It can have moves like Superpower, giving it access to Max Knuckle. We know it has Knockoff and Fake Out, as well as Wood Hammer. I would be surprised if Rillaboom did not have Grassy Glide. So I doubt it has a secret 5th move hidden in the back there. Amoonguss uses the Protect, doesn't want to take any damage. Rillaboom. Looks like that was potentially a Fake Out going into the Amoonguss. Tri-Attack coming out of the Porygon 2 into the Arcanine. We saw it did a good chunk of damage last game. This might be the best way for Guillermo to deal with the Arcanine if there is no Primarina in the back, for example. And we haven't seen Gastrodon out of Antonio this game, which I think is definitely interesting. Because so far against all three of these Pokemon, Gastrodon is actually Gastrodon actually kind of is fine facing down a Corviknight. Corviknight can't do too much to it unless it starts, like, if it starts setting up Iron Defenses and Body Presses. Gastrodon isn't really gonna like that too much. But if there's an Arcanine, it can threaten something like a Flare Blitz. Rillaboom can use moves like Fake Out and whatnot, and really cause kind of a lot of havoc for that Corviknight. Arcanine though, it is taking so much damage from this Porygon 2. Knockoff coming out of the Rillaboom takes off the Eviolite from the Porygon 2. Very similar move to last game, but this time it kind of comes at the cost of this Arcanine taking so much damage. Amoonguss though getting very, very weak here. Porygon 2 takes a better chunk than last time thanks to the Eviolite getting knocked off. Now this Arcanine is awake. However, they are still in Trick Room. Amoonguss is still going to be moving before it. And that means that Amoonguss very well could just try to go for a Spore again. And this Rillaboom, so neither of these Pokemon kind of really want to be looking at an Amoonguss right now. Rillaboom especially, because it can be taking something like a Sludge Bomb, which is not really going to want to take. At least not too many of them. It looks like it is likely something like an Assault Vest, so its special defense is at least a little bit better than where it normally would be, making the Amoonguss not quite as effective against it, but it still does considerable damage, as we are seeing here. Arcanine also still definitely threatened by the Amoonguss. The Spore coming out just completely neutralizes it. I guess Antonio is kind of thinking, well, I would rather have Arcanine be the one going to sleep than any of my other Pokemon. So I'm going to be okay with it taking those sleeps consistently. Now Corviknight looks like it has something like safety goggles, but it also is not affected by the sleep, which is, not affected. It's not affected by Sludge Bomb, which is actually huge. But here we see Porygon 2 gets another big status condition on Arcanine. And this is actually probably the best status condition to have, either the best or the worst. But immediately, Arcanine uses an Overheat, breaks through the freeze, and deals damage. That's kind of the downside to that status condition. Any decent Fire-type move can just go ahead and thaw it, or it's just a coin flip for Arcanine to thaw out. Sometimes though, we see Pokemon where they're frozen for 5, 6, 7 turns and can't do a thing about it. But now this Amoonguss is down thanks to that overheat. Arcanine just managed to survive through that tri-attack, and barrier triggered, and now it's at a relatively high and healthy life total. Good chance that Trick Room either went down last turn or is going down this turn. I don't quite remember the numbers. But also, one thing to remember, neither player has Dynamaxed yet. Guillermo's Pokemon aren't looking too good. Amoonguss is already down. Porygon 2 is weak, but both offensive Pokemon, kind of offensive Pokemon, are still ready to go with Corviknight and Porygon 2. Not Corviknight and Porygon 2. Corviknight, and as we saw kind of in the back there, a little sneak preview, and Primarina. But the problem is Guillermo doesn't know if Antonio has Gastrodon in the back, and as we see here, simply just the threat of it has prevented Guillermo from bringing Primarina in at all, even though it does good work against the Arcanine. The other thing is, the rest of Antonio's Pokemon, Corviknight and Rillaboom, as well as potentially the Gastrodon in the back, do plenty of work against Primarina. Here we see Antonio, though, bringing out the Corviknight. This time there is no setup on it, there is no bulk up, and this is just a normal Dynamax Corviknight. There is no Gigantamax Corviknight from Antonio's side. We'll see what Guillermo does here. Guillermo actually does what is likely the exact same thing, unless we see a surprise Porygon 2 Dynamax, which I think probably isn't the case. Let's see if this Corviknight is Dynamax or Gigantamax. This Corviknight is also Dynamax here. Looks like a very similar set from both players, kind of going for just really kind of wants to get the Max Steel Spike and the Max Airstream, which are probably two of the better Dynamax moves instead of Corviknight's signature Gigantamax move. Arcanine using Protect here. Looks like Thunderbolt coming out of Porygon 2 does a little bit of damage to Antonio's Corviknight. Here we see the Max Airstream coming out into Guillermo's Porygon 2, and Porygon 2 goes down. So now two of Guillermo's Pokemon are down. Antonio's Pokemon are all very much alive. Arcanine is a little bit weak, but Rillaboom is but the rest of Antonio's Pokemon are relatively healthy. This Corviknight, though, doesn't have any damage on it so far. Max Airstream coming out of Guillermo's Corviknight, but the Protect from the Arcanine keeps it alive. Speed boosts on both sides, definitely going to be important, but we saw Antonio's Corviknight went first. There's potential that it is a speed tie, as these two Corviknights look like very, very similar builds. Grassy Terrain goes away. This will potentially be just in time for Rillaboom to come back in if it wants to. But it is under threat of a Max Airstream, which I'm not sure it wants to take, with a little bit of chip damage already on it. And there's a couple things that can happen here. If Antonio is confident that their Corviknight will be outspeeding Guillermo's, a Max Airstream from Antonio can lead to Arcanine potentially just going ahead and using an Overheat and likely doing a pretty good chunk into Guillermo's Corviknight. However, that is at the threat of Guillermo's Primarina just using something like a Liquid Voice boosted Hyper Voice and taking it out. And Antonio's Corviknight isn't going to like taking that either. Now, Antonio could just switch in to Gastrodon here, which certainly be a threat. It is a very bulky Pokemon. It can take hits very, very well, but I'm definitely going to be interested to see if there is a switch, what would happen here. Now, Arcanine outspeeds both of Guillermo's Pokemon, definitely weakens the Primarina's special attack here, but that Mirror Armor from Guillermo's Arcanine, or from Guillermo's Corviknight, weakening the Arcanine, and Antonio kind of just accepting that this Arcanine is going down, as it's probably going to be taking damage either way. So it does look like we actually have a speed tie here from the Corviknights. Guillermo's Corviknight gets off the Max Airstream first, and now Antonio's Corviknight gets off the Max Airstream, doing so much damage to that Primarina, who, as we can see, after Max Airstream boosts on both sides, is still definitely slower. Looks like that is either Hydro Pump or Hydro Cannon, and this Primarina is Life Orbed. We know that there is a Rillaboom in the back here. We actually still haven't seen a Grassy Glide out of it. We have just seen Woodhammer, Knockoff, and Fake Out. So there is a fourth move hidden there, but we haven't seen it yet. And Gastrodon actually comes out now, and this is probably this is the worst thing that Guillermo could see here. This Gastrodon can simply just sit here on the battlefield, use something like Protect, and this Primarina can't really touch it. And Corviknight, if it can certainly just go for an Airstream here, but this is going to be the last turn of Dynamax. Primarina is going to be faster than this Gastrodon no matter what. Primarina uses Protect. I wouldn't be surprised for Antonio's Gastrodon to use Protect here. Instead, we do see the Max Airstream going into Antonio's Corviknight, doing a little bit of damage, just ignoring the Gastrodon for now. It's just saying, you know what, I'll deal with it later. We could see something like an Earth Power here, certainly. Coming out from Antonio's Gastrodon into the Primarina, perhaps. Antonio using the Max Airstream. It's going to do a good chunk of damage, but it doesn't quite take out the Primarina. So Guillermo's Corviknight is at relatively full health, only taking damage from a Snarl, which didn't affect it in any way. Scald, though, coming out of the Gastrodon into the Corviknight. A burn here would be huge, but it doesn't look like there is one. And both Corviknights go back down to their baby forms. And so Antonio is looking to be in a pretty good position here. Rillaboom still can come in. It doesn't really like staring down a Corviknight too much, but it's perfectly fine dealing with the Primarina. Antonio's Corviknight is relatively weak here. Looks like that was probably an Iron Head coming out from Guillermo. Antonio's Corviknight looks like it flinches. Moonblast coming out into the Gastrodon does a good chunk of damage. No special defense boost for it this time. Primarina goes down to 1 hit point. That is going to be huge here. Scald from the Gastrodon into the Corviknight does once again a little bit of damage, but no burn. And both of Antonio's Pokemon are not in a great spot here. Gastrodon, there's a good chance it has something like a berry, so it can recover. And the next attack that this Primarina uses will take itself down. Guillermo's Corviknight looks like it's using Brave Bird here. And Antonio's Corviknight goes down. It looks like Antonio's Corviknight just lost so many speed ties. We saw it move first on that first one, but after that, it's just been taking hits again and again and again, and that flinch was huge. Gastrodon gets so weak. Primarina goes down. And now it's a 2v1 situation. Gastrodon eats that berry, heals up a little bit, and it's relatively weak, but it still has that Scald. And every time that these Scalds come out, there's a chance for a crit or a burn. And that Corviknight does not like to feel that one. Now, Corviknight this likely does have something like a Lumberry, so a burn would have survived a burn. But now this Rillaboom is out here. We know it has Fake Out, and like we said, there is that secret fourth move that we still haven't seen yet. And a Grassy Glide here would almost certainly take out a Corviknight. And Guillermo just saying, "Yep, that is it for this one." So we see in this second game a relatively clean 2-0 from Antonio, but it got a little bit dicey there. That Corviknight matchup was definitely big in that second game. Gastrodon was not as much of a upfront player, but it definitely was just kind of looming in the back there. As we saw, Guillermo just didn't bring in that Primarina at all until the very end. In which case, it was able to do a good chunk to the Gastrodon, since Gastrodon didn't get the special defense boost from Max Quake. But those Corviknights kind of going head to head there in those speed ties. Getting that first one off, getting the first Max Airstream off on Antonio's side was probably pretty big there. It definitely kind of saved a little bit of trouble. But after that, pretty much every turn, I think Guillermo won that speed tie, which definitely kind of put him a little bit in favor to potentially get there. But that Gastrodon surviving 2 Moonblast from Primarina was huge. Those Scalds, especially that crit on that third Scald on it, definitely came in pretty darn big. So we saw some important crits there. We saw some speed ties going back and forth in that second game. We saw just how important that Gastrodon was in the first game with that super heads up play from Antonio, will-o-wisping his own Gastrodon. Definitely some awesome Pokemon here. But thank you all so much for watching. We'll be back again tomorrow with our next analysis. Thank you all once again, and be safe, be smart, make wise decisions, and have a fantastic day. Farewell.